afternoon, and welcome to the final episode of the inaugural season of the Tribal Justice Seminars. Um, as you know, there will be an evaluation at the end. The link will be sent to you. If you submit the evaluation, you have a chance to win a Pendleton throw. And the winner from last week was Sean Hales, who is the tribal court facilitator of the Sunak tribe of Kodiak in Alaska. So congratulations, Sean. And if you submit your evaluation this week, you'll have a chance for that throw as well. Because it's our last session, there are a number of people that I need to thank specifically. First and foremost, I want to thank Chad Smith, former principal chief of Cherokee, and John Miller, who is an attorney and our tech guru. The two of them have been not just the lifeblood, they have been the stitches that hold everything together, making sure that this was possible, recruiting people, making the tech available. So first and foremost, I need to thank them for making this happen. Then I need to thank all the guests we've had. We've had 12 previous episodes, all wonderful speakers. I know I felt a little bit guilty after the session last week when I said we were saving the two best for last. All the speakers have been fabulous. And I have learned from each and every one of them. And I want to thank them for contributing their time. I also want to thank Judge Abinanti and the Yurok tribe as the primary conduit for the funds that set this project in motion. And I need to thank Nina Marie Bell at the UC Davis Law School, who has tirelessly promoted the series and has been a great help with the initial design and scheduling of the programs. I also want to thank Marie Louise Frampton, the director of the Aoki Center, which is a part of the UC Davis Law School and the sponsor for this series. Without her support and that of the Aoki Center, we wouldn't have been able to put this series on. And last, I'd like to thank Kevin Johnson, the Dean of the UC Davis Law School, for their willingness to provide a forum for tribal practitioners. Again, our goal is to build a community of practitioners. We can't be in the same room together. So I encourage you to turn on your cameras, let people see who's here, reconnect with people that you haven't seen in a while. And if you're willing, put your information, your contact information, your job, your tribal affiliation in the chat box so people can reach out to you. And we can try and at least virtually connect people that we would otherwise do when we are sitting in the same room. So thank you all for being here. I have the very special pleasure of introducing our speaker today. And you need to know right up front, I am not biased even a little bit about this. She's my big sister. She is the reason that I am where I am today. She's been my mentor, sometimes leading, sometimes kicking from behind, but pushing me to do and expand more than I thought I could do. She believed in me when I'm not sure I believed in myself. She is, in my opinion, the premier tribal court judge in the country. She has taken the lead at finding ways of putting tribal values and institutions into a working relationship in court systems and serving tribal communities, rather than just saying a court is a court. She has gone beyond that to say, what is it that our community needs and how can the court system be a part of doing that? So it's with a great deal of pleasure and pride that I introduce you to the Chief Judge of the Yurok tribe, former state judicial officer for 17, 18 years, a longtime tribal judge, teacher, colleague, and mentor, Abby Abinanti. So Abby, take it away.
All right. Ayukui, Nek now Judge Abby, Rekoy Ak. I'm very pleased to be here today, and I thank Judge Thorne, also known as Billy, for his gracious introduction of me. And I appreciate that you've taken the time to join us. I know at this point we're all super fatigued with this whole Zoom thing, so I do appreciate it. I will have to say that in watching the introduction, I wonder if there'll ever come a time when I can look out and see Awak Claudette White and not tear up. I don't know that that will ever happen. It certainly hasn't happened yet. I miss her greatly, and she was a lot of energy for all of us. And, you know, she did a lot of good things. And sometimes I go, and exactly why did you have to leave now? You know, what about me? You know, what about the rest of us you left here? Then I go, you know, this really wasn't about you, Abby. And I try to move off of that. But it's a hard one, I have to say. Today, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the differences between our systems and the state and federal systems and how we got there and why it's important that we get there and that we stay there. Our court system, when we first started it, we started out with 2 people. Today, we have employed over 50 in our tribe. Our tribal membership is a little over 6,000. And you go, what in the world are you doing over there? I can tell you what we're doing. We're looking at who we are and where we came from and how we're different. And when I say that, what I mean is that states and federal judicial systems are rights-based systems. You have a right to this, that, whatever. You have a right to remain silent. There is no native system that I know of that's rights-based. They're all responsibility-based. And you have interlocking responsibilities. And those responsibilities really should guide you in how you live your life. It isn't about, okay, you have a right to remain silent. As I have often said to Urox here, try that on your grandmother, and I'll sit and watch because I like to be entertained. You know, because that is not going to happen ever. Or let's just say you will not be the same person who said it as you leave the house on the dead run. You know, and it's a little embarrassing to be run down by an elder, but you could be. You know, and the truth of it is that my expectation and the court system here's expectation is if you were involved in making a mistake, then you simply say it, because humans are the type of animals that make a lot of mistakes. And if you don't accept that as part of who you are, then you've got a problem, you know, because there is no way to get through this whole process without making mistakes. So what you have to figure out is when you do it, how do you correct it? You know, and I want to just step aside for a moment and say one of the people that we've added to our court system is a cultural officer. And one of the programs that she just finished was a shadow puppet show in an elementary school. And you go, what is that about the court system? Well, the shadow puppet show was about a story of Little Bird and how Little Bird breaks his wing and then has to ask for help. What do you do when you don't receive help? When is it important to give help? And what is the aftermath of that? Because those are the rules and the laws that we lived by. And in presenting that story and helping that school present that story, 20% of those children in that school are Yurok children or Native children. But the entire school worked on the project because we are a part of a community and we want to be able to say, this is how we resolve our issues. And we think one of the important lessons, legal lessons, is how do you ask for help when you need it? Because one of the aftermaths of the invasion is a lot of us need more help than we ever did. And we have to be able to ask for that help so we can correct our behaviors, because we've learned a lot of really bad behaviors, frankly. So how are you going to fix that? And what we look to help guide us is the value systems that we had before the values that drove us before the invasion. And the practices are not, many of them don't really apply now, but the values do. The story of Little Bird, and that's Ernie Albers' great grandmother's story, that applies today as it always did. And how do you do it? And how do you make that work for you? You know, and that's what you're trying to learn, is what are those practices, and how do you develop practices that are consistent with that value system of how do you ask for help. You know, one of the ways we do it, for instance, is that we have a series of wellness calendars, and you can graduate from wellness programs. But after you graduate from wellness programs, if you feel like you need to come back, all you have to do is find your ex-counselor and say, I need to come back in for a few months. I need to come back to court. And when we're in court, what that means, our wellness program, is you meet with your advocate and with a judge at least every 2 weeks. And why is that? It's not because we're hounding them. It's because we're walking with them. We're being with them. Because if you look at a culture like all of us are trying to work in right now, when you had issues, who would you go to? Basically your aunts or your uncles. And they would be with you and they would help you through this period. And that's what our advocates do. They become aunts and uncles, and then they help you through these processes. And we do that in wellness court, and we're having a lot of success in diverting people out of criminal court back into these calendars, because we do a tremendous amount of hands-on work. You know, and part of what the issue is when we're looking at other systems is that they're very symptom oriented. So the symptom is you're taking drugs. The symptom is you're doing this. Well, that's important, because we need to get rid of that. But what's also important to people like us is context. Where in the world did that come from? And how did it get there? And I'll give you an example. We decided that after working with victims of domestic violence, that we were going to work with perpetrators. So I wanted to design a battery intervention program. And we wanted to make it culturally relevant. So the first part of the class, and it's a 52-week class because it's state certified, so that people who commit those offenses in the state system can come to our program and be satisfied with their state requirement. And some of the first things that you have to do in that class is you have to go home and find the oldest people in your family and ask them, where did violence come into our family? Up here, it came in from either boarding school experience, being an indentured slave experience, or one of the massacres. That's where it came from. It isn't that you're a bad person or that your folks were bad people. This is a behavior that descended upon you. And now you have to be strong enough to say no more. You put it into it for your family. And that gives a person a lot better chance of moving forward, because it's not like, oh, you're the bad seed. No, you're not the bad seed. This happened, and now this is how we're going to correct it. And it's really important, because a lot of times, one thing I learned as a state court judge is that when I was dealing with juvenile delinquents, for the first couple of weeks, I would go, you look at some of these kids and you go, that is so stupid. Why in the world did you do that? And they're looking back at you like you're going to tell them, because they have no idea why they did it. And looking at people who commit battery, it's often the same. They don't know where it came from. So they can wake up in the morning and be perfectly fine. And then all of a sudden it jumps out at them and they do it. And they have no reason where, in their mind about how it came from, or they blame the other person, or they do whatever. And this helps them know where it came from. Because people talk about, well, genetic memory or behavior memory or whatever they want to call it. We call it what happened to the ancestors is inside of us. That's the best way to say it for us, because that is how it got there and how it's acting out, because it carries forward to us, from what we were. I mean, it's sort of, I was talking to a group of social workers, UROC social workers one day, and most of them had not been in the field very long. And we were talking about the fact that, that some of these people, meaning our clients, did not have very good parenting skills and da 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 da. And I said, well, how many of these people had indentured slaves as a parent or a grandparent? They're like, I don't know. Well, how can you talk with people if you don't know that? Because one of the things about being an indentured slave is that, trust me when I tell you, they weren't parented. That wasn't part of the slave program. It's how to parent a slave. It did not happen. And we were not particularly good slaves, and we ran away when we were old enough. But the problem was we had already been parented by that time, or not parented, more to the point. And I said, and furthermore, since we're all UROC women in here and we can have this discussion, exactly how is anybody going to come into your home and take your child? And they all went basically to, every woman said, well, they'd have to kill me. And I said, exactly. So those children who were taken as slaves got to watch their mothers killed in the process, because that is the only way that would happen. There is no other way you're going to come into that home and take that child. Just not going to happen. And the historical record indicates that. So with that in your memory, how is that going to impact your parenting? And that's what we need to know. And that's what we need to help people get over. So if you weren't parented, then somebody has to walk along with you and tell you, this is how you do this. This is how you do that. It isn't like, stop being a bad parent. Okay, let me make a note of that. I'll get right on that one. And how much I get 6 months to stop being a bad parent. Okay, got it. Get right back to you. I mean, it's sort of like, how in the world do you expect that to work? Because it's not going to, because that's not who people are. So, when we're talking about value systems and practices, you have to develop systems that allow for that time and that energy. And when you go, what are you doing with those 50 people? A lot of those people are advocates in the field, because they have to be able to spend that time, and they have to be able to spend that time on each component. With the batter intervention program, we were doing this, we did all this work, and we were thinking we were like grand. And then about 5 months into our brand new program, X number of people got sent to jail for not doing their homework. And I was like, what in the world is wrong? After all the work we went through, the least they could do is do their flipping homework. And then I went, wait a second, I have to figure this out. So I spent 3 days looking at the list of these people who were in jail and going, what in the world? Why did they do that? How come they're acting like this? And this is a great opportunity. And then I went, ugh, I know these guys. None of them graduated from school. They can't read and write. So I sent the advocate, I said, I want you to go up to the jail and ask each one of these knuckleheads if they can read and write. And then the advocate came back and said, they can't. And I said, okay. So they would rather go to jail than tell me that they can't read and write, which of course makes me want to do domestic violence. And then we could all be there together. At least I can read and write for them. But, that didn't seem like a really good approach. So I didn't do that. But what we did do is allow them, and we created a system where they could do their programming on their phones by dictation and stuff. Now, I personally can't do that, but all of them can. So I guess it's a trade-off. And they were stopped doing we can't do our homework, started doing their homework, and they graduated. But it's that kind of thing that you have to be aware of, and you have to know your community and know what's going on. and if people would rather, for them it was embarrassing, so they didn't want to admit it. And you go, it makes sense. It totally makes sense, but it's not okay. And I need to figure that kind of thing out. And we need to figure that kind of thing out when you're doing it. And the whole thing about what's interesting is that there is no real cultural model. For a while, when we have a number of people come in on a calendar and you go, do you want a trial or do you just want to talk about it? People often don't recognize they're making the cultural choice. Because the cultural choice is, I just want to talk to you about it and see what, because I'll offer them, do you want to try to make this right? If you did something wrong, just tell me and we'll work on getting it set right. It's not like, you guys have known me all my life and we can count up how many things I did wrong, but we only have a certain amount of time on the morning calendar. So let's not go there. But you have to recognize that that's where you are. And if you're there, then help them make it right so that they can walk out. If there's a dispute between two people, how do you fix that? Because having a winner and loser is not really helpful. It really isn't. We had a huge dispute on the river. Two guys basically came to blows over a fishing hole, and I had to issue restraining orders. And I got them both into court. And I said, I don't know what you were thinking. I said, I issued this restraining order because if you two knuckleheads, killed each other, I can't fix that. But today I have this person here who is, as you both know, a camp leader, a dance leader. And I would give you the opportunity to try to work this out with him if you want to. And I said, or you can, try to work it out or come back in here and face one mad old Yurok lady and see how that goes for you. They thought that they would rather go out and talk to him. So they go out, and about an hour and a half later, I hear laughter, and they come and knock on my door, and they go, oh, don't worry, Judge, it's okay now. We took care of it. It's all right now. And I said, so this is not going to happen again. They said, oh, no, it's all fixed. I said, fine, you go home and you tell your sons and you tell your nephews, and I don't want to see anybody from these two families in here again about something like this. Are we good? We're good, Judge. Don't worry about it. And I never saw them again on that issue. I see them around, of course, but I don't see them on that issue. So you have to, work that kind of thing out because you want harmony. Because what is my goal there and what is my value? Community harmony. I don't want to have just a restraining order. I want peace restored, and I don't want blows on the river. And so it's always about that. And how do you make it right? If you make a mistake, how can you fix it? How can you do something for the community? If you've offended the community, then you have to give back something to the community. And a lot of our wellness programs feature a give back component. So the person has that sort of being verified in them, that they are now a member of the community who gives back. And that gives you pride to be able to give back to your community and to be able to say that. And in all of that you do, in our child support, we decided we were going to do child support. The state cannot come in and force child support unless the council allows them to. And so I said to the council, we need to deal with child support because we were never the kind of people who did not support our children. It just isn't who we are. But I said, in addition to the situation that we're now in, one, I will change the child support calculation to reflect what is the economic reality of this reservation. That's number one. And number two, I will offer to you and to the members in-kind support so that if both parents agree that they'd rather have this than money, that's what it will be. And I will take the time to explore that with people. And that can be wood, it can be salmon, it can be deer meat, it can be whatever. It can be babysitting by one of the grandmothers so that both parties can work. It can be any of those things. And now we have the state coming to us saying, how did you set that up? Can you help us set it up for our courts? Because it works. And it also increases the number of parents who are working together, which is our long-term goal, is for the parents to work together. So each calendar that you have, you look at it and then you try to bring it into the sphere of what is your value system? What is the village value system? And then you take it and you develop practices like in kind, like better intervention, like elder support. We operate out of here, the Elders Food Program, and we deliver food to elders, because that to me is a primary responsibility of any justice system in a tribal system. So each program that we have, we figure out what is the value of the village as related to that, and then we support that with practices. We try to get, we work out policies inside the court to support educational advancement of our own employees. And we raise money to help pay for their books for school and give them release time to do their finals and to prepare for their finals, help them with papers, if they need an interview or if they need whatever. So we do, everything that we do is hooked back into a village value system. Every practice that we try to do, and the whole deferment of people out of the criminal system. We're doing a joint court in both Humboldt and Del Norte, and the joint court systems are on family wellness, around abuse and neglect, around dependency. And how do we get these families to reunite and or stay together? And we give them a lot of support. And those courts also, one of the things that we said, we'll be happy to do this, is that we must meet every 2 weeks, because humans need that constant attention to detail. You can't help anybody change behavior by giving them a list and saying, I'll check back in 6 months. It just doesn't work like that. So you have to be aware of who you're dealing with. And also, I think for us, one of the things I've really been concentrating on lately is that we all communicate in English. And English is not, for many of us, the language of our ancestors. And English is a very noun-based language. And almost every native language that I'm aware of is verb-based, is action or behavior-based. So that a lot of the things that we want to describe, there aren't words for in English. So it leaves us with huge gaps, in terms of what we're describing. And as you're trying to talk about developing practices, because they only name what they want to name, and we need to name other things and make sure that we do those, and think of those actions, because if they're not out there listed in the index, you go, well, that's not possible. But it is possible, and we all need to think it up and be able to present that to the people that we're working with, and to help them reintegrate and to give back to the community and to understand these are the practices that we're going to do, and this is how it's different from the state court practice.
And Abby, one of the things I remember you telling us is that this is less about inventing new systems than remembering how we used to take care of each other.
Exactly. Yeah, it isn't. There's nothing that we do that's new. It's just what we're doing is, and he's entirely correct, is remembering. Remembering it and then calling it a practice. It's just basically good home training, updated. And that's where we are, and that's how we're trying to do it, and adapt it to each calendar and each place that that it's necessary.
So remembering how we took care of each other and then figuring out how to make that happen today, because it's still a village community. These are still our relatives, but we live in a modern world, so we have to figure out how to take care of them with what we have today.
And the other thing is, we need to look at the system that they're in, the state and federal system, and realize, when people talk about disproportionality and all the things that are wrong with those systems, that those systems were designed to act like they're acting. And we basically will never see the light of day if we stick in those systems. We really need to back out of that to a large extent and have different ways for our community. And in doing that, be willing to share them with other communities and bring people into how we're doing it. You know, the whole thing of, okay, well, you get to be an American now, and now you can jump in the melting pot and lose your culture. Really? You know, that to me seems like another not very bright idea, because the people who came here had cultures and strong cultures, and many of them, frankly, were like our culture. You know, and they left those at the door, and that has not done anybody any good. You know, and it's just getting worse. It's not getting better. So we have to branch out, and we have to welcome people into how we're doing it. You know, when the state comes to me and says, will you tell us how to do in kind for child support? I'm going to tell them, because I think it's important, you know, so that they can offer that to the communities that they're dealing with.
So Abby, there are a couple of questions. One is, how do you measure success, and how successful have you been in trying to do these things? What impact has this had on your community?
We measure success now. You know, I learned a few years ago that about data and the importance of data in driving social programming. And so we had our first graduate with a doctorate from Harvard Social Policy School, and all the little data nerds who are like 47 times smarter than I am get together and figure out what data points are. And we just got a fellowship that'll be announced soon about creating yet another data system that talks to each other inside the tribe. Data is very important. We're very successful in terms of getting people off of different roles, but we need to be able to present it in a way that is now acceptable to sort of all the data mavens. And one of the things that I'm really working on is to make sure that the data is more expansive than the symptom data. Like, I want the data, missing and murdered Indian women is a perfect example. I want to know for each of those missing and murdered people, were they in the foster care system? Were they mothers who lost children to the foster care system? Both of those numbers are exceedingly high for victims. Now that means something. And we need to address what that means. You know, so part of it is, how do you ask context questions? And how do you then let that help you develop different practices? You know, and that becomes very, very important. You know, and the way that you can talk to other people and other systems and to the federal system is through data. You've got to get it, you know, and the people that work in the court here are developing those systems constantly and doing the input into it. I am not allowed to touch them for somewhat obvious reasons. But
so what I hear you saying though, Abby, is that data that's important to finding solutions in the community, not data just for the sake of counting widgets.
Exactly. You know, and it's also to go, you know, until I looked at the list and I realized, because I know a lot of the missing and murdered, I went, it isn't just that they were in foster care. A lot of these people had their kids taken away. And you go, that's the kind of thing that is not an accident. You know, so you need to think this out. You know, I have these conversations with myself all the time. I need to get out a little more. But, you know, that's the kind of thing, when you see that, you realize that's important. No, I don't know exactly what to do with it, but I will work on that. I will figure that out.
And by learning that, you learn that one person's trauma and tragedy actually is the whole community's.
Exactly.
Because it expands to other people. It's not just the loss of that one person, but it's everything they could have brought to the community. So one of the other questions, Abby, is can you give some examples about preventive measures that prevent this kind of trauma from happening?
Well, right now, what we're doing is we're looking at things, and a good example is it more youth programming, more, part of it is we have a traumatized community. So then you have to go, okay, let's get back earlier in the process before they start developing symptoms and try to deal with those issues. And one of the things that we're concentrating on now is that we have just funded a program that, and I think Joanne's here somewhere, that has a lawyer whose only job is to work with children in the education, around their education, so that they will take on appearing at IEPs, at truancies, at suspension hearings, so that we can make sure that they're integrated, and they will have 2 advocates, and that's just for this county. And once we then have the success of that, we'll expand it. I think we really have to strengthen our children, to move forward and to go, okay, we don't have to wait, we don't have to go, okay, now you're up here and you never learn to read and write. Or we can look at people in certain age groups and say, do you need help? Do you want help going back to get a GED? Because I had somebody we helped finish high school, and he said to me, one of the best things that happened out of that was his daughter no longer fought him about doing her homework because they were doing homework together. And that's the kind of change you want to make. And he didn't even realize that that would be one of the benefits. He was doing it because he thought it was the right thing to do, for him and to get whatever, but it changed his whole family dynamic, and those kinds of things are the kinds of changes that you have to do. And so if you do it and then you pay attention, you'll get those examples back. So that's part of it. And each one, and watching families who go through dissolution and watching them work together through in-kind arrangements and child support, those kinds of things. And how do you do it? And we really work on them to co-parent. Yes, you guys can, you don't have to be married anymore, but you do have to co-parent because you already did, and that I won't undo. So teaching them how to do that, and then watching the differences, and that's what you're looking at. And in every area you can do that. We have special courts for a number of things now. It's education, it's veterans, it's reentry, and I just saw this study that said that the little thing of giving, and we're going to raise money for this, phones, cards to inmates who are in jail or prison decreases recidivism tremendously. And that's the kind of thing that I'm constantly looking for, because you would have thought, all these whole different things, these big solutions, but no, their ability to maintain contact with their family decreases recidivism. That one thing makes a huge difference.
Keeps them connected to their families, to the things that are important.
Yeah. But it's not the kind of thing, because everybody always looks at, like at bigger things, but I'm constantly looking for those smaller things. And you go, okay, we can do that. We will raise the money for phone cards for everybody that we have that's, in jail or prison. Because that's worth it.
That doesn't require $1 million grant to bring in a PhD and 3 MSWs and so forth. It's just something that every community could do.
Yeah, we can do that, and then from that, I want to build, use some of our support vehicles to do visitation, those kinds of things. But first, I'm going to get the phone cards, so it's constantly looking for ways in, to do that.
Well, so that leads me into the less glamorous part of your job. You've put together from 5 people to 50. That's a lot of fundraising.
Mhm.
How do you do it? Where did you get started? Because I know there are other people out there who are struggling with, there's a need in our community, but I don't know where to start. Can you give some people some ideas of how you got started and how you have to be persistent?
Well, for me, I I started working with a young graduate, a UROC graduate, and pick out somebody who's like way smarter than you, get them, who want to come home and start writing proposals. And the fact I've been turned down probably more than we've been granted. But once you set your mind on it, you keep at it till you get it. That's all there is to it. You look at vistas, you look at different people you can do to coordinate it. And I read probably 100 releases from the feds a day about grant opportunities. Now I'm trying to learn how to do private foundation work. And it's a learning cycle, but you start with the federal grants. It's, there's different places you can learn to write them. And what we did, I said, I almost felt sorry for the feds. I mean, Jessica, who is our CEO, Jessica Carter, we had some notable failures in the beginning. And I said, I kind of felt sorry for them because what she did, you turn her down and she would spend the winter, this was for CTAS, for major funding for tribes, reading every grant that got funded, every criticism of why we didn't get funded, and every program that was successful. And then she would write it again next year. And she would keep at it till she did it and got funded. I mean, you have to turn into like a major maniac. And, and it's like, just you have to nerd up. That's all there is to it, and keep at it and go, I am not going to stop until I get this. And I will see what they want and I will do that and I will provide that.
See, as capable as Judge Abinanti is, she's found allies with skills that she can put to work.
Oh, yeah.
So part of the idea is to have a vision of what you want and what you need. The other part is enlisting allies who can help you get what you need. You don't have to do it alone, but you have to have the vision of what you want.
Yeah, I think you need CEOs and you need grant writers on your team, and people who are capable of running these programs once you get them. And, the whole thing now we have, Dr. George, who I told you is our social policy guru, to get the data and get the data systems, because that's part of what you need now. So you do that and you stick with it. And all the time, though, looking at what does the village need and how would we have evolved but for the invasion? Because we would not be the same regardless. This is 200 years later. We weren't the same 400 years ago as we were 200 years ago because things change. That's just the nature of it.
What I hear you saying different than what some people do is you're not chasing the grants. You're not just applying because somebody has money to do something. You have a vision for what you want to do, and then you try and find ways of funding it. So you're driving the process. You're not just chasing grants.
No, if I was just chasing money, I would have done what my grandfather did, which is, some of you who know me, he was a bank robber. So. And that wasn't very successful as a career either, I will say, but there's a certain method to his madness. I've tried to, like I said, we were both in justice, just different ends.
Tell us a little bit about how you developed your partnerships with Del Norte and Humboldt counties.
Well, part of it is I had practiced here, so they knew me. I had done a lot of judicial education, having been on the state court bench for a number of years, and been in private practice. They knew who I was, and I made the outreach to them. And essentially, it gets very difficult as a state court judge in a rural area because you actually know who you're dealing with. And if you're doing the same thing for 18 and 20 years and watching yourself work with somebody who you start working with as a 9-year-old, who you're now about to sentence for life imprisonment, you realize this hasn't worked. You know, what I've done for the last 20 years has not worked. And there's very few people who like to do that kind of thing. You know, so you can say to them, let me try, let me try. And we share results, you know, and they, as, you know, as whatever, they want it to work also. You know, and that's part of it, is that they get exhausted by not having it work either. You know, and increasingly judicial officers are looking around them going, this is a mess. You know, no matter what I do, no matter how many of these, I mean, when I was doing dependency, I was really good at it, and I could go through, you know, a 30, 40, 50 line calendar in a setting because I was good at it, because that's how they did it. But I don't do that now. You know, I do it a different way because
And
I
you
can
do it because you
accomplish
do
it.
it differently because it works.
Yeah. You know,
So
and that's the whole
it's
thing.
about the results. It's not about just simply processing.
Exactly.
Okay, Abby, one of the questions is, how important is the role of a tribal court administrator when you're trying to take on the tasks that you have?
Well, to me, it's been monumental. You know, our CEO is highly, highly skilled, and in her spare time managed to put herself through online law school and is now a member of the California State Bar as of this last summer. So, you know, that, and raise a child, you know, not wreck her marriage, be responsible in community. So she's done all of that. And I think that you can't do it without one. I just don't think you can, because our roles are different and we both work, you know, 10 hours a day at least, you know, and you can't work 20 hours a day. You just can't do it. So you need somebody, you know, and you need to work together as a team. I mean, sometimes she wants to smack me, but she hasn't yet. So that's the good news.
Okay. Another question is, so many of our communities have been, trust has been ripped apart with judicial systems in particular. How do you go about trying to rebuild that kind of trust in the community? Because you can have all the good intentions in the world, but I know that you had to reach out on a personal level to people.
Yeah, I think you have to be in community. They have to see you. They have to see you move. They have to see and hear about what you've done. And do sometimes people get mad at me? Yes. Do I take it personally? No. You know, and that's basically my plan. And when I first came home, people would go, "Oh, you can't be the judge because you know Bill, you know Rhonda." And I'm like, "Yeah, well, of course I know you. We all grew up together. So what are you trying to say?" You know, we're village people. Do you think 200 years ago we ran up and down the river looking for strangers to resolve our problems? I don't think so. You know, and we're all Yurok, and we know that we didn't get along part of the time because it's our nature, frankly. So, you know, you have to look at that and go, how did we do that? How did we make that work? There is a way to do it. We did it for thousands of years. It's only been the last 200 that we haven't done it. So this whole stranger justice thing that people think is, you know, the cat's meow is a relatively new creation. And frankly, it's not working for them. So I don't know why the heck we should embrace it, you know?
Okay, and another question is, how do you deal with the needs of the outside community on consumer transactions and protect the community and still enable people to do business? And if you really want to get down in the weeds, he was asking about UCC articles and tribal adoption of those.
Well, you know, I think you have to figure out what your goals are, what kinds of businesses you want, how do you want to integrate the businesses, I mean, we were talking about working with our tarot department to make sure that our wellness clients and our reentry clients have access to jobs, you know. So you have to look at things like, if you set up a system and you follow the requirements of the state and feds, that means you can't hire people with criminal records. You can't hire people who don't have a driver's license. You can't do da 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 da, just on a very simple level. Well, does the person you hire to work on this house over here really have to have a driver's license? No, because they're not driving unless you count the nails that's driving, you know? So you have to think these things through, because a lot of those business systems have been devised and then imposed on us as part of how we can do business with them. And we have to figure out, does this make sense for us and for our community? And if it doesn't, then we can't really adopt it. If we're going to have agreements, we have to very carefully look at what our end game is, and how we're going to do it. And if we're going to do that, how many of people, you know, I would always look to, who are we going to employ in those businesses? How are we going to be successful with that business? Is it something that we feel we can support or not support? How are we going to train people for it? You know, because we do need to work. You know, so that at a very basic level, that's how I kind of approach it.
So it's always from the basis of, does our community need this? And what specifically does it need? And then can we implement something that does that, rather than simply say, we want a consumer system or we want a credit system.
Right.
You're operating very much from, what does the community need first?
Exactly. And how to help people get that. You know?
Okay. And then there's a question, is your batterer intervention program still operating? And if so, how can people get information? Because they think there's a desperate need to share that information.
The head of our program is Lori Nesbitt. Anybody who wants it can just email me and I'll push you over to her. You know, and we've shared our curriculum. And it's a process to get trained and approved. You know, and we decided we were going to invest in it because when I did a review of who's in jail and why they were in jail several years ago, most of our people were actually in jail for domestic violence. And I was like, okay, that doesn't work for me. You know, so we had to figure out how we're going to deal with that. I mean, it didn't work for a number of reasons. So once you realize that, then you have to figure out, how am I going to correct that? How am I going to fix that? I mean, it makes total sense if you look at, like I said, the historical trauma that we had up here. You know, that should not have been any like newsflash, you know, but you can't just blame it on that last statistic as if that's the problem. No, these things started that problem, and that's how we're going to have to address it.
Another way that I've tried to teach judges that idea is not ask, what did you do, but what brought you to this place?
Exactly. And what's interesting is that so many people don't know, because we also have a community where the elders at a certain point decided they didn't want to talk about stuff like that. I mean, a perfect example is, you know, I was a big mama's girl and I was always around the house. And I went to school, I came home, maybe when I was 19 or something, and my mom and her sisters were having an argument. And the argument, and my mom was the youngest, was, why were you such a baby and you crawled into our window and you got us all in trouble because you couldn't even stay in your own dorm? And I'm like, what are you guys talking about? And all three of them had been sent to boarding school, and nobody had ever said anything about it. And as I asked them that, three had turned around and basically said, we're not talking to you. And that's the whole of the story that I ever got.
So it's,
You know,
so it's important to understand what came before.
Right.
Because if we can understand that, we can begin to heal.
Well, and also you don't realize what you're learning, you know, because then I grow up, I have a child, and frankly, I rarely went to school. I mean, I would miss 2 or 3 months of school a year habitually. all the way through school. And I grow up, I have a child, I'm traveling, and I'm not leaving her home with somebody. So I just take her with me. And about halfway through kindergarten, I go, exactly how do you think this is going to end? My darling, I always talk nicely to myself. And, then I realized you can't do this. You cannot have her cutting all this school. You need to find another job and stay home while she's in school. If you don't want to leave her, then stay home. Those are your choices. But what the point of the story is, I had learned it was okay not to be in school without even really realizing it. So when, I didn't want to leave her, so I didn't. My mom didn't want me in school because she didn't know how to deal with me being picked on by non-native people. So she would just let me stay home to protect me from that.
So
But
good
there was
intentions
never,
aren't
yeah,
enough.
yeah. So it isn't, and if you don't think about it, you don't realize why it all happens, and it made sense in context. But if you had just approached her and said, okay, your kid's not in school, you're in trouble, it would have got us nowhere.
Context and history and community make all the difference.
Right.
Well, thank you, Abby, for taking your time. We
Sure.
appreciate this. We generally leave the Zoom open afterwards for informal conversations and questions. If you have time, we invite you to join us. But thank you so much. This was a good note to end on for the Tribal Justice series. We hope that you have learned that in a number of different settings, it's okay to be different than the state courts and the federal courts. We need to understand how they do things and how they work, but then also understand the needs of our community and how we can fill those needs and help people heal and repair the trauma that has happened before.